A sour feeling was lodged in his gut before Dan opened his eyes. The only positive thought he could conjure was that it was Friday. The last working day of the week would bring in a much-needed break. The unrealistic sales target haunted him every morning, and his wife sensed the change. The hopes of a great evening meal were crushed with a reminder that Kate was going out for dinner that night. The only saving grace was that she was not planning to stay out late. A gorgeous wife was both a blessing and a curse. It left him susceptible to manipulation at her whim, and there was little he could do to prevent it even when he saw what was coming. On this occasion, Kate was a blessing. Unable to stop time, Dan delayed the inevitable by standing in the kitchen leaning against the counter, putting off the drive to work as long as possible. The loving, beautiful wife saw his pain and offered comfort. There was no pep talk, no advice, no distraction of any random, yet interesting topic. He just watched Kate approach in one of many skirt suits that looked so good on her. The clock never stops. Truth told, it was all part of the plan from the start. Kate could only spare a few minutes and opted for slow pleasure that she knew would leave Dan hungry for more when she got up to leave. Her parting words were accompanied by a wink, "Think naughty thoughts of me today." During the morning briefing in the showroom, Dan was reminded that he was behind his monthly target. He had been doing fine until Edward changed it earlier in the week for no reason. It all started after Kate brought his lunch and Edward failed to get a date with her. Since then, Edward went out of his way to make him feel miserable, even to the point of passing off a difficult customer that everyone knew was just a time waster. Edward was a pain in the ass to work for and only had the position because his dad owned the place. Edward, on the other hand, was having a great day. After the morning chat with his team, he returned to his office and closed the door. Taking out his phone, he found Kate in his contacts and pressed the button to edit. Kate was deleted, and in place of her name Edward tapped "Dan's wife" and saved it. He looked through the office window at Dan and spoke, "Call Dan's wife." The phone spoke back his command and initiated a call. The wife answered cheerfully. Edward matched her light tone and went through the pleasantries normally associated with a date. He asked how she felt and made sure she was still comfortable with the plans. A few details needed to be arranged. Kate could make all the plans she wanted. Whether he followed them or not was up to Edward. So far, though, the plan sounded acceptable. An evil grin stretched across Edward's face as he watched Dan finish and leave for the day. He had given Dan all the worst jobs and made a point of boasting about his conquests numerous times throughout the day. He wanted to make sure Dan was aware later that his wife would just be one of many women had relationship with him. He picked up the keys to the Porsche and walked out of the office with even more confidence than usual. At the appointed time, back at Dan and Kate's house, the doorbell rang. "Can you get the door, honey?" Kate's voice shouted from upstairs. Dan opened the door expecting to see someone from Kate's office. As soon as he saw Edward, his face drooped. "Is something wrong? I didn't leave keys out on my desk, did I?" "No, Dan, you're fine." Seeing Dan look glum was a mini victory. He watched attentively when he told him, "I'm here to pick up Kate, actually." Dan scrunched his eyebrows in a sympathetic yet condescending look as if Edward was a complete idiot. Edward gave him time. He saw Dan process his suit, different from the one he wore at work, and the collarless shirt. Doubt increased gradually to a point, and then Dan's mouth opened and his eyes relaxed into what Edward could only assume was whipped resignation. He opened the door and let Edward enter. Score 1 for Team Edward. The previous gave was a washout because Dan did not even know it happened. The awkward silence troubled Dan while they stood in the front room waiting for Kate to come down. Edward relished it and took the time to look around. The time passed sooner than he would have liked. Footsteps drew both men's eyes to the stairs, and for the second time Edward whistled as he watched Kate. She would blend in with the rich and famous. All in black, the cocktail dress showed off great legs, emphasized as before with black stiletto heels. He assumed all the sparkle highlighting her neck, one wrist and an ankle were not genuine diamonds. Edward failed to keep an eye on Dan because he was so impressed with Kate. She graciously accepted his compliments and put her arm around his. This brought his attention back to Dan as Kate gave him instructions. "I thought you would like pizza, so I ordered one already. There is some cash on the kitchen table. Don't forget a tip either. We won't be out late." Then she asked Edward if he was ready to go. Asking his question in front of Dan was more important than hearing the answer, "Are you wearing stockings?" He checked her out again. With a smile and a look at Dan he declared himself ready to go. At the door, Kate stopped. "Oh, Dan, we'll be home for dessert." And then they left. They drove to another part of town and Kate only questioned his plans when he pulled into a hospital and parked. "There is some I want you to meet," he said. On the way in he told her about his grandpa. He just had a knee replacement and wanted to check on him. The few people they passed on the way to his grandfather's room all noticed Kate. They arrived at a private room. Kate followed closely behind Edward. He and his grandpa exchanged greetings and then he asked, "Who is this beauty?" They were introduced and the questions began. "Where did you meet this fine lady?" "The name is Stan, by the way." Stan offered a hand in greeting. Edward moved behind her. At the same time he said, "I wouldn't call her a lady." Kate turned crimson and had no idea what to say as she was preoccupied by the impression that this was not the proper way to show respect to her elders. As if Kate was not there, Stan asked Edward, "Where did you find a girl that looks this nice?" Kate could not believe her ears. She opened her mouth to set him straight and then something changed her mind. "She is semi-respectable wife, actually." Edward held her hand out to show his grandpa the wedding ring on her finger. The fingers inside her stopped. The old man looked at her. "Has my grandson coerced you?" It was Edward's turn to take offense. Kate tried to look at Edward as if to say she was going to get him into as much trouble as possible. Turning back to Stan she admitted the truth. "Ed has forced me a couple times. But he always had my permission." When they left, Stan was in a more relaxed state and his spirits lifted. Edward was glad he had made the effort. The next task was to dine the woman. For dinner, Edward had chosen a popular bar and grill. Part of him wanted to take her for fine dining but he wanted to be comfortable. Given how overdressed Kate was for a bar and grill it gave him great pleasure to see the look on her face when they arrived. She expressed her surprise very politely, but Edward could sense her disappointment. "As much as I would like to take you to a class restaurant, I have some misgivings." This brought immediate questions from Kate which Edward explained were due to her continued use of Ed when addressing him and her persistent desire to control what they do together. "Fine," Kate said with emphasis. She sat in the car going through a breathing exercise to calm herself. "What do you expect of me in here?" That was more like it. With an offer like that he had to take advantage. "Act like you can't get enough of me. Flirt, smile, laugh at my jokes and be agreeable to everything I do." A nod of her head preceded verbal confirmation. "Okay. I can do that." At a booth for four, they sat opposite each other. Kate began conversation by relating how Dan had reacted to everything that happened at work that week. Hearing the other side was beneficial and Edward paid close attention. She was the easier to talk to than anyone he had been on a date with, even indulging his questions. There seemed no boundary for what Kate would discuss. Edward paid the bill after the meal, feeling Kate had earned it already with his grandfather and would be repaying him an even greater value once he took her home. Still looking elegant, Kate walked up to the front door and unlocked it. She took Edward's hand as she walked in and closed the door behind them. They were still holding hands when they entered the lounge. Dan was watching TV. "Would you turn it off, please? I don't want you to miss anything by being distracted." Dan did as his wife asked, although his face was not entirely approving. "We could use a drink. I'll have a gin and tonic." "What would you like, Ed? Beer? Whiskey? We have wine if you prefer." Making note of another use of Ed, he declined. That's okay, Kate. I am driving tonight. You are welcome to stay over if you want. The unexpected invitation was too good to refuse. Then I'll have a whiskey, please. Kate already had her arms around Edward's neck. Dan will get them for us. She moved in for a kiss before Dan had left the room. Guided to the couch, Edward let her take his shoes off and put his feet up on the couch. Joining him, Kate sat on his lap with her feet on the floor and proceeded to kiss him again. They were still kissing when Dan brought drinks out. Kate knew he was there but continued the passionate kiss until her husband cleared his throat. Still taking her time, she stopped and looked up. Accepting the tall glass she said, "Thanks, hun." She took a big gulp. Edward took the whiskey offered. "Would you bring the small table over? I'm going to need both hands over here." Edward knew there was a table right behind him at the end of the couch and Kate was just having fun getting her husband to do things for them. It was impossible not to smile at Dan bringing over a small table for her to put her drink down. His attention was needed by Kate. "I hope you don't mind, Ed, but I like to have my husband watch." "I do," Edward said. "Can you guess what happens next?" Edward slept well and woke refreshed. A generous mood swept over him. He left with a smile on his face, looking forward to Monday morning when Dan would arrive at work.